When I first visited Le Cas Government Hospital a few years back, I did not really want to be there. Sarah and I were in Sierra Leone, a nation of nearly 9 million people in West Africa, to learn about the country's maternal and neonatal healthcare systems. At the time, Sierra Leone had the highest maternal mortality rate in the world, with around 1 in every 17 women dying in pregnancy or childbirth. And we'd traveled there to learn about and share stories of people affected by the crisis. Thanks to investment from Sierra Leone's Ministry of Health and deep partnership with other organizations, maternal mortality in Sierra Leone declined by more than 50% in the 5 years following our trip, a reminder that there is nothing permanent or unalterable about health inequities. So, our trip was supposed to be oriented around the global maternal mortality crisis, not tuberculosis, and by our last day in Sierra Leone, I was exhausted and ill. I possess a somewhat fragile constitution when it comes to health, and also when it comes to most other things. But a doctor we were traveling with asked us to visit Le Cas with him. He assured us that Le Cas, a facility supported by the global health nonprofit Partners in Health, was basically on the way to the airport, and he needed to consult with the staff about a few cases. At the time, I knew almost nothing about TB. To me, it was a disease of history, something that killed depressive 19th century poets, not present-tense humans. But as a friend once told me, nothing is so privileged as thinking history belongs to the past. When we arrived at Le Cas, we were immediately greeted by a child who introduced himself as Henry. "That's my son's name," I told him, and he smiled. Most Sierra Leoneans are multilingual, but Henry spoke particularly good English, especially for a kid his age, which made it possible for us to have a conversation that could go beyond my few halting phrases of Creole. I asked him how he was doing, and he said, "I am happy, sir. I am encouraged." He loved that word. Who wouldn't? Encouraged, like courage is something we rouse ourselves and others into. My son Henry was 9 then. And this Henry looked about the same age, a small boy with spindly legs and a big, goofy smile. He wore shorts and an oversized rugby shirt that reached nearly to his knees. Henry took hold of my T-shirt and began walking me around the hospital. He showed me the lab where a technician was looking through a microscope. Henry looked into the microscope and then asked me to, as the lab tech, a young woman from Freetown, explained that this sample contained tuberculosis, even though the patient had been treated for several months with standard therapy. The lab tech began to tell me about this standard therapy, but Henry was pulling on my shirt again. He walked me through the wards, a complex of poorly ventilated buildings that contained hospital rooms with barred windows, thin mattresses, and no toilets. There was no electricity in the wards, and no consistent running water. To me, the rooms resembled prison cells. Before it was a TB hospital, Le Cas was a leprosy isolation facility, and it felt like one. Inside each room, 1 or 2 patients lay on cots, generally on their side or back. A few sat on the edges of their beds, leaning forward. All these men, the women were in a separate ward, were thin. Some were so emaciated that their skin seemed wrapped tightly around bone. As we walked down a hallway between buildings, Henry and I watched a young man drink water from a plastic bottle and then promptly vomit a mix of bile and blood. I instinctively turned away, but Henry continued to stare at the man. I figured Henry was someone's kid, a doctor maybe, or a nurse, or one of the cooking or cleaning staff. Everyone seemed to know him, and everyone stopped their work to say hello and rub his head or squeeze his hand. I was immediately charmed by Henry. He had some of the mannerisms of my son, the same paradoxical mixture of shyness and enthusiastic desire for connection. Henry eventually brought me back to the group of doctors and nurses who were meeting in a small room near the entrance of the hospital, and then one of the nurses lovingly and laughingly shooed him away.